All right, good evening, everybody. Are we excited that Brian Kilmeade's in the house? I tell you, I just finished reading Andrew Jackson this week. Such a great book. I enjoyed it so much, Brian. Thank you for your work on that, especially like the part of the nuns and their prayer.
Ursuline nuns.
Yeah, the Ursuline nuns praying during the battle, and the wives going up there and praying. They were fighting for a lot of good stuff. So
don't give it all away, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, friends, good evening. My name is Jeff Hunt. I serve as the Vice President of Public Policy for Colorado Christian University. I direct our think tank here called the Centennial Institute, and I'm the chairman of the biggest event we host year-round, which is the Western Conservative Summit. Yes, it's a lot of fun. Friends, we're a unique university compared to a lot of the other universities that are out there. It is a strategic priority of Colorado Christian University to impact our culture in support of traditional family values, the sanctity of life, compassion for the poor, biblical view of human nature, limited government, personal freedom, free markets, natural law, original intent of the Constitution, and Western civilization. Do you know many universities that are specifically geared towards advancing those? We're unique, and as a result of all the craziness that's happening on college campuses around the country with safe spaces and trigger warnings, Colorado Christian University has experienced 9 years of record enrollment. We're in the midst of a big building boom. You probably saw the cranes going out there, but the truth is that parents want to send their kids here because they know that they're going to get a quality education rooted in Christ and rooted in the conservative worldview, and we're very proud of that. We're going to start this evening with prayer and a pledge of allegiance from two of our students here at CCU, Chelsea Johnson and Winston Ives. If you can, please stand and join us in prayer and the pledge of allegiance. Come on up. We'll do prayer first.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us here tonight. We're so blessed to be able to come together as a body like this and hear from an incredible speaker, and we ask that you be with our speaker and open our hearts and our ears to what he has to say, and allow everyone to get home safely tonight as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
And please remain standing for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, you may be seated. I noticed there was no kneeling. Thank you. All right, at this point, we're going to show a brief video to welcome Brian. So if we can dim the lights and start the video, that would be great. Thank you.
From the Fox News radio studios in New York City, it's Brian Kilmeade.
You've taken a ton of your calls, especially after developing breaking news. Joining us now officially is General Michael Hayden. Nick Foles, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Condoleezza Rice is here. She's got a brand new book. Lee, welcome back.
Dude, good to see you again.
Oh,
It's been a good morning.
Final meeting before the final rehearsal for Fox NFL Sunday, behind closed doors, finishing touches on the script. We're about to go inside.
How you doing, man?
Carry hours before the big game. 100 million people watching, all these countries. What do you thought?
Brian Kilmeade.
Time for this week's Celebrity Stroll, where I convince a famous person to skip lunch and go for a walk with me instead.
Sammy Hagar, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. While you're here, as comfortable as you look forward to getting home?
I love coming to experience how people live and what it's like to be just stacked on top of each other.
John Rich, it's Brian Kilmeade. We have a scheduled Celebrity Stroll today. You got to teach me how to be cool and look cool in Nashville.
She won't let him in. She won't let him in.
I said it's me.
He's your boss,
man. Yeah. I think it's a bachelorette party. I don't know. They're having fun. You having a good time?
Oh, I sure am having a great time.
You know Brian Kilmeade from Fox and Friends?
Yeah. Hi, how are you doing?
You think I'm running, right?
My gut tells me this announced coming in May and June that you're in.
Okay, let's see what happens.
Donald Trump will be the 45th President of the United States.
I'm asking for help from you, the most average man in America. Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade.
Can you give me an example of a time when someone was critical of you and you thought to yourself, I deserve that hit, I deserve that column, I deserve
probably
that.
I could never do that. No,
I'm not going to give you any ideas.
No.
And yet I've accomplished, with all of this going on, more than any president in the first year in our history.
Now for a phone call that should feel unprecedented, but has become alarmingly routine, it's President Donald Trump.
I'm freaking out over this story.
In terms of achievement, I think I'd give myself an A, because I think I've done great things.
Well, I'm going to go with a 9, because a part of my brain is telling me that all of this is wrong.
My God, I've lost Kilmeade.
I met Mr. Reagan recently in Orlando, Florida, at his home in the magnificent Hall of Presidents. And even though he had many visitors, he took the time to talk to me, Brian Kilmeade. That's great.
Who is your daddy and what does he do?
Bravo, very good.
I think I got it, right?
Very good. Wow. He's an action hero. I mean, just look at him.
You're friends with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold's a very brilliant, driven man. People underestimate how clever he is.
So you wouldn't replace him, but you would act with him again.
Oh, sure. Oh, he and I back to back, this would be amazing.
This is one thing you're most comfortable in. You're a wrestler.
Going to look a little.
So this should be perfect.
Yeah, that'll fit. That
Right.
fits a 205.
That's fantastic.
Sure.
All right.
That's a nice thing.
Yeah, this is a good year financially for that
Bush
stuff.
and Reagan had this idea that you should keep your money.
My wife, my family, I'm in the biggest liberal family in the world. But I had the more money when Bush and Reagan was president. I was living. Oh, I shouldn't have said my wife's going to kill me for that.
And is this your last job?
No, I have other jobs. It just won't be quite as dramatic.
Not as stressful.
Nor will I be quite as pampered as I am.
Now let's go outside to find out what happens to Brian in this soon-to-be legendary interview.
Hey, you're a machine. You're a machine. How do you stop this?
Whoa, I'm sorry. That's how we stop it, Brian.
I mean, the intention was obviously evil. No. The intention was obviously evil. He was doing too well. You wanted to test him. He's a little kid now, Brian.
You don't know what's happening. You don't know what's coming. But
15
you're looking forward.
seconds. You're right.
So, and you're looking, and that's a lot of eye
10
contact.
seconds.
Oh my God! And then it's like this.
3, 2.
Hey, Brian, make sure you hit the bucket.
It's coming out carbonated.
Who's thirsty?
Want some milk?
Strap you in. How do you start it? You use the key. For any reason, you splash down, I need you to pull the key off.
Friends, please welcome the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, including Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans, host of Fox and Friends, and the host of the nationally syndicated radio show, The Brian Kilmeade Show. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Kilmeade.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Great introduction. Great job. Thanks so much for coming out on a Friday night. You guys are tough. A little bit of snow did not stop you. In New York, that's enough to cancel. They just say, but not you guys. No problem. Sorry I was a little bit late. Got caught a little bit in traffic, but air travel did not let me down for the first time since 1996. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. And I look forward to talking to a bunch of people that understand where Fox came from, how I became the luckiest person ever, where in 1996, I started filling in 1997, went full time. It was at a time in which when you told people you were on Fox News Channel, they'd say, you mean the local Fox? You mean Fox Sports? They know what I was talking about. It wasn't even carried in New York. And by every major event that happened, we got more and more viewers. And now for the 4th straight year, not only the #1 news network, we're the #1 network in all of cable. That beats the Cartoon Channel. That beats TNT. That beats everything. That means when you put it on, more people than not are choosing Fox, which is pretty cool. And they did a study, and it turns out the reason people watch is me. I don't have the study with me. I had it. You know, I got to be more careful. I should have had it. So, no, I just, you know in life when you get lucky, and I knew it from day one. I didn't care if anyone watched. I knew when I walked into the basement level of Fox. Now we have something like 28 floors. The basement level's been converted into a gym. Obviously, I'm there a lot. Look at the size of me. And now I knew I felt like I walked into Yankee Stadium when they were the Highlanders, because people thought back then there was something great about the Yankees. Even though we're in Colorado, I think you can respect a team that won 28 championships. I knew we were expected to do something great. And know why? Because when we got up every day, we did this thing called not looking for what America did wrong, what America did right. We're not here to cheerlead, we're just here to tell the story. And the fact is, no one was telling that story. That America, if the mistakes we make are what I call, my words, hustle mistakes. Sometimes you try to get back and you try to deflect, keep a ball from going in, and sometimes you're scoring your own goal. And America is the hardest judge on Americans, period. But we always correct our mistakes. What people misinterpret my country, in my humble opinion, our country, is they think we're coming apart. What we're doing is we want to get better. And we do this other thing our parents told us not to do. We argue in front of other people. And people on the outside think we're coming apart. That's all because hopefully most people just want to get better, and they have different ways of getting there. And different ways and different views on how to get there. What we do now is just make sure we do this thing that used to be automatic. We back law enforcement, we back our military, and we understand that when we were born in this country, we hit lotto. And to stay here and be appreciative is our responsibility to pass on. And a lot of times in life, when you have something and you didn't acquire it, whether your parents gave it to you or you inherited it, you don't appreciate it. Our goal is to make people know we appreciate it. And if you can't travel and can't look around and can't travel and can't see how other people live, it's hard to understand how great we have it. Even on our worst day, it's better than most nations' best day. So I appreciate it. And the one thing I would say with the thousands of people that work at Fox, we appreciate it. And people go, wow, you're Republican, you're red. Not really. We're just not anti-American. And that's sadly what stands out. And that's what stands out today. Went through a lot of different evolutions. I mean, when I started in '96, I used to do a 3-hour sports show. And then we got interrupted by the Bosnia War, and sadly Princess Diana died. And then in 2000 we had the election mess, and in between that we had the blue dress with Bill Clinton. And every single time, more and more viewers who were like ambivalent about the news had to come to the news. And then when the election mess, we used to toss out to our reporters, and I had no idea if Bush or Gore was going to be president in Florida. But thank goodness Florida straightened out their election problems. We don't have any problems anymore. They learned their lesson. They really have bounced back well, and they have not given us any more issues. So, 18 years later, like glass. So, fascinating time. And then we're on the air on 9/11 when the planes hit the building, and then we're on the air when Afghanistan becomes a war, and when Saddam Hussein gets what's coming to him, and then the Iraq War and the invasion. We're on the air as the tanks roll from Kuwait, and I had a chance to go to Kuwait 3 days before the actual invasion took place, and saw the quality of people who serve our nation in our nation's armed forces, and they are bar none. And no, I know World War II is the greatest generation, but man, I would put our men and women up against them at any point at any time, and I saw it up close. The selflessness, the sacrifice on a daily basis, and what they do. I hope one thing I do think is great about this generation. I have not seen any anti-military behavior. When you go to airports, we see the uniform. Everywhere you go in malls, you see the respect. And I think that's another reason to feel pride from what we have. So the other thing about Fox is I have a personal passion, like many people watch the news of history. So when Bill O'Reilly started pumping out these books, I go, wow, Bill, I love them, but I'm wondering how many people will buy them. Bill never doubted. But when the books started rolling out and I saw the reception they got, and right away you think because Bill O'Reilly's the #1 personality ever, but you read the books and you understand people were buying them, they didn't even know who he was. Even though we get huge numbers, but there's still a small portion of the country. I sensed that there was a great sense of patriotism that was not being served in our country. So I said, Bill, I got this story that I've been looking at for 20 years. And it's actually happened down by your house. He lives in Manhasset. I can't tell you exactly where. He's got security. So, and he goes, what is it? And I said, well, George Washington had this spy ring. And he goes, how did you discover it? I said, well, in 1989, I was actually sitting on 25A, which I know we got Long Islanders over there, right? And it's a famous thoroughfare. And I watched these gentlemen who weren't dressed as town workers, and they were drawing a line. They were holding a guy, drawing a line, and I said, sir, no offense, I think a machine did that. And he said, well, it does. Mine's going to wash away. We're with the Long Island Historical Society. We're commemorating 200 years ago where George Washington came to thank his spies. I go, what? He goes, yeah, George Washington had spies without which we don't win the Revolutionary War. And I just sat there for a second. I go, I got to ask you, what are you talking about? I grew up on Long Island, went to Long Island University. My dad owned a bar on Plandome Road in Manhasset. My grandparents owned it before that. And George Washington went down the street. He goes, oh, absolutely. He said, well, in 1783, we win the war. And he goes back home, wants to high five, and it turns out we're coming apart. We have no president. We have no direction. All these states said, we want to be autonomous. There was no sense of unity. They have an emergency constitutional convention, and they realize Washington's the best among us. He's going to be president. So Washington goes, I'll do this. I'll leave Mount Vernon again, and I go to New York City, despite the traffic and the subway problems, which was another brave of him. So he goes to New York City and says, yeah, before I'm taking office, I'm going to go thank everyone that helped me on Long Island because this is where the war took place and this is the spies I never met. And we can't find proof of him meeting more than 2 of them because a lot of them said, I will fight for you, I'll spy for you, but I want to promise that you'll never give up our names. And they said, fine. And Washington said, I'll never give up your name. And it's great. He goes, but he kept their letters. Enabling people who are enterprising and curious for generations to come. Who are these people? Who is the farmer, the bartender, the longshoreman, the grocery store owner, the printer who is a British journalist, that's what they called him back then, and the socialite who combined forces over the course of 4.5 years to put together such a spy ring that even the CIA uses it as a template for all their spies before they go out on a single mission. So me being a Fox guy and a little paranoid, I got so caught up in this story, I read about it. The good news is the original book written in 1930 by Morton Pennypacker, you got to go get it. Now, if I picked up that book, it's written not to be read. It's written like a historian that wanted to record. But that book was out. But the young adult book was in. So I go over to the part of the library where the seats are up to your knees, and all the kids, and I go, there's only one other spy book. The other one's out. Can I take out this young adult book one just to find out what happened? And it's 110 pages. I closed it and I said, is this true? Is it? You go, oh yeah, it's true. So then I get the other book and I see the actual letters and they're smudged. Why? Because they were written in invisible ink. Why were these letters written on other letters? Because they wrote between the lines. That's where their phrase comes from. What do these guys have and these women? They had cover stories. They had dead drops. So if you came to get me, you might be able to grab me, but you're not going to grab the other guy because we have a central location and a cylinder in the ground. I'm going to leave it there. You're going to come back in 2 days. You're going to grab it when you think you can. So they were relaying they were relaying the troop movements of the Brits, recording the movements and the troop size. And they were getting it from Long Island, central Long Island, Setauket, from the city, back to Long Island, across the Long Island Sound, into Connecticut, into upstate New York, where Washington's headquarters were. So good were these guys. And so, and such leadership you read right in front of you, that Washington was able to get more out of them than they ever thought possible. And there were times when the ring came apart, but they would rally because they believed in not a country, but the cause and the idea of a country, which has never existed before, and they're taking on the #1 fighting force in the world. Now, I said to myself, this is what I wanted to do. I can't relate to Washington's greatness. The more you read about him, the more you realize he comes along every 2 generations. There's a reason why Jefferson's on Mount Rushmore. There's a reason why Benjamin Franklin goes down in history. They weren't just good for their times, they're good for any time. But if you told me a bartender, a longshoreman, a farmer, a printer, a grocery store owner, and a socialite, I can relate to that. Those are the people I know. And if you talk to the people that are on Mount Rushmore today, the founding fathers, they know they're nothing without us, the so-called average, everyday people that do extraordinary things because they believe in the country. And they don't have fame and acclaim, and guess what? They don't want it. That's not why they do it. They do it because they realize there's something special here, and our job is to keep it going. Their job was to make it happen. And they lived and died without any acclaim. So I released George Washington's Secret Six. Now, there are other spy books out, so I approached it like a spy project. I got all these people who do this extraordinary thing, the reenactors, who are never to be laughed at or mocked because they are historians. They do it to keep our story alive. So if anybody, you ever see a kid saying, look at that man or look at that woman dressed in retro times, you should salute them because they're keeping our story alive. So I would walk into these small little historical societies and I talk to them and I realize The people in Setauket disagree with the people in Oyster Bay, who disagree with Morton Pennypacker in Bridgehampton, who has all the stuff. And they're kind of mad at each other, hundreds of years later. So I did something extraordinary. I rented a room at the Holiday Inn. I got a deal. I brought them all together. And I didn't go to Subway where the heroes would have been cheaper. I went to a private deli. I got some beers, some wine, some soft drinks, and I came up with 25 questions. I rolled the cameras and I go, guys, start talking to each other. They started interacting. I wanted to see whose stories held up, and the questions and answers held up, and the ones that had disagreement and they weren't budging, that gave me freedom to decide what I wanted. And the stuff that was written and the documents I was able to find, we were able to put together a book that reads to something, not a historian that goes to Harvard, but everyday people, and I made sure it's accurate. If you look in the back of the book, I made sure people that you guys respected looked at it and gave it a thumbs up. Jay Winnick, John Meacham, Douglas Brinkley, and they supported Oliver North, who's a great historian, very underrated. And George Washington's Secret Six ended up selling over 1 million copies because people care about the country, people want to know the story, and I'm very, very cute. So I also did stand-up for a while, and I was not very successful. But I just said, the one thing they always told me when I did stand-up is, Brian, if you're doing your set, don't be so married to what you're doing. If you're almost done and you get a laugh that's louder than you usually get, leave. Because you're not going to beat it, you know? So, good night, everybody. You know, tip your waitresses. So I knew, I had one story I studied for 20 years. I have no follow-up. So the publisher said, you got to come up with something because nobody had a response like this. And I said, well, I'm fascinated by the war on terror, this Islamic extremism, and I did notice that anytime someone wants to talk with perspective on Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, all these extremist groups, they always go back to Jefferson. They go back to Jefferson because Jefferson dealt with it first. So anytime somebody like Jim Sofka, who works at the Jefferson Library, would write, or Victor Davis Hanson would write, they say, well, listen, let me tell you how long this war is going to last because it started 200 years ago. So that brought me to Thomas Jefferson, the one who confronted Islamic extremism back then. And the more I looked, the more I understood that this is a story that had to be told and brought out, but in a way that's readable. And that's why I wanted to bring it forward, because you know all the central characters to open the book. Adams, Jefferson, playing a huge role. But when you close the book, you're going to know people like William Eaton, Stephen Decatur, Edward Preble, the so-called average, everyday Americans who did extraordinary things in order, and of course, Presley O'Bannon, the Marine, and a handful of Marines that did extraordinary things. They lived and died without any claims. Some had fame in their day, but they didn't last through it. And I thought if I could bring some of them out, it's worth the trip. And I did. So Thomas Jefferson, we have this problem. The year is 1785. We don't even have a president yet, but we've got our first enemy. It is these four nations off of North Africa, Morocco, Tunis, Algeria, and we now know as Tripoli, which we now know as Libya. We don't have a problem with them. We have merchant ships and no navy to guide them. But as we go past North Africa, these pirates, using the Quran as their excuse, would take our crews hostage, hold them out for ransom. They take all the cargo and take the ships. Next thing you know, we got these horror stories of these guys being held against their will, some of them murdered right on the spot, and they want ransom. We got a problem. We're buried in war debt. We have no navy. We have no army. We try to convince them they have no enemy. So it's up to Jefferson, who's in France, and John Adams, who's in England, to start talking to the Tripoli ambassador, the Morocco ambassador, the Algiers ambassador, the Tunis ambassador, and say, hey guys, your problem's with Europe. It's not with me. We know what it's like to be oppressed and have people rule. We're not your problem. And they said, well, you are a problem. And one of the quotes was from the ambassador who they thought they were winning over. All nations which had not acknowledged the prophet, Muhammad, were sinners, whom it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave. Christian sailors were plain and simple, fair game. Now, after a couple of days where they were optimistic, that statement really threw off Adams and Jefferson, and they took it differently. So for Jefferson said, we got to fight him. And we got to fight him because if you don't punish the first insult, more will follow. He goes, weakness provokes insult and injury. A condition to punish is often prevents it. I think it's in our interest to punish the first insult because insults unpunished is the parent of many others. How smart is Jefferson? Not a fighter. When they told him to get a militia together and fight, he said, not really, I'm more of a thinker. But when it came to this, he said, we got to fight. He was very aware of how we were being perceived. Even today, it's not enough to have strength, you got to show you can use it and willingness to do it. Sadly, it's still the playground principle. The weakest one gets picked on. We see it today. Even though we're at this intellectual stage of cyber technology and we're walking on the moon and we're going back, doesn't matter. It's still the same principle. Now, I should say John Adams said we can't fight them because we're going to have to fight them forever. I hate to tell you, but they're both right. So Jefferson says, I'm going to give you this one because we don't have this thing called a Navy. He wanted to get the rest of the countries to help and protect us, but they had no interest. They wanted us to fail. I found out early on our biggest enemy was every other Western government because they knew if we were successful, if you're in the absolute monarch business, this whole election thing, not good. If you're a king running for election, not really good. But if this works in America where people leave power, have a say in a quality of life, that could change everything. And they're losing their finest people to this place called the United States of America. Not because of it's easy, because it has an opportunity to provide happiness and liberty. That's it. It was brutal early on. You talk about not knowing what's next every day. But people here in America, we don't want an easy time. We want a fair time. We want a chance at success. We don't want it guaranteed. And that's what I find that's written over and over again. As people push west and push south, they said, okay, we want a fresh start, we want a fresh start. Even when they went to Texas, America wasn't fresh enough with 18 states. They go, we're going to Texas and start all over again. Prices are just going through the roof. It makes me laugh out loud when I read this. So what we ended up doing is Washington became president. He brings Adams in with Jefferson. He says, guys, we got a problem. They have hundreds of our guys hostage. A lot of our ships keep getting captured. They don't want to go through North Africa. And our number one client is in the through the Mediterranean. What are we going to do about it? He said, well, we got this extraordinary price to pay, essentially extortion. And that's what Adams recommends he pays. Jefferson says, my sense as Secretary of State, my recommendation is we don't pay it, we fight them. So Washington says, we still don't have a Navy. I'm going to go half and half. I'm going to provide the money and provide the contracts to build 6 ships. But I'm going to go with Adams. I'm going to write the checks to these countries so our guys stay safe. Next thing you know, the ships are done. Adams is president. Adams goes, yeah, I'm more worried about France. Sorry, I'm not going to talk to those guys. They're crazy. I'm not going to deal with it. Well, when he loses after one term, Jefferson doesn't declare war, but he stops making the payments. They declare war on us. Game on. So he's able to send ships over. In the beginning, we got the wrong leaders, the wrong admirals, the wrong captains. But what does America do? We correct, we rotate, we correct, we get some synergy between them, we get some communication ability, and sooner or later, we're able to seal off the harbors and begin to strangle Tripoli, who chopped down our flag and said, game on, it's war. They took 300 plus of our guys, and they're under horrendous conditions, many of which are murdered in the most horrific way possible that makes ISIS seem humanitarian. So William Eaton, who was an ambassador over there and is half Mike Ditka and half Thomas Jefferson with his intellect, but Mike Ditka and his toughness, he said, listen, these people, these Muslim people are good people. They're horrible leaders. They're being oppressed. They don't know what we have. They don't know how bad they have it. If we could free them up from their leaders, there won't be a problem. And Jefferson says, no, we're going to keep it in the water for now. He goes, no, you're going to need a land invasion. Well, after a couple of years, what do Americans think when you take a couple of years to win a war? They get restless. They start looking at their leaders and saying, who elected this Jefferson guy? We're in an endless fight. We don't have our guys back. We're having these horrible stories written. These hostage letters are coming back. So William Eaton said, you know my plan? So he goes, go see the Treasury Secretary, get your money. We never had this conversation. So his plan is get a handful of Marines, go hire some mercenaries, get some guns, and get the deposed leader of Tripoli out of Egypt, go 500 miles through the desert without a map and without an app, through the desert, with mercenaries, 500 miles, looking nothing at the stars, and take the city of Derna, then Benghazi, then Tripoli. Sounds easy, right? Sounds impossible. All Jefferson wanted was word that we started a land invasion to make them come to the table to get our hostages back and forge an agreement where we no longer write checks. Well, everyone underestimated a guy you probably don't know named William Eaton. He marshals his troops, incredible leadership, an unbelievable horseman, knew Arabic, was able to inspire his guys. And even though he got shot right away in the battle, in 2 hours took the city of Derna. And when he takes over, by the way, Spain, France, England, the powers of that day, said, we will never do this because you're never going to have success. And we're doing it, and we're only a handful of years old, a couple of decades old. William Eaton takes Derna and then takes charge and says, hey guys, they expect to be ruled and lorded over. He goes, no, I have no interest in that. What do you need? I'll provide it. I have no interest in oppressing you. They have a degree of freedom. And then when they start coming back in to try to take Derna back, the people of Derna started repelling their own army back. So here is William Eaton, Presley O'Bannon, a handful of Marines taking over a city just by providing freedom. Next stop Benghazi, next stop Tripoli. Well, they are shuddering in Tripoli. And this guy, Tobias Lear, longtime aide to Washington, new aide trying to make his name with Jefferson, cuts an early deal. Our guys get out, our guys get released, they come back a hero until they realize William Eaton came back and goes, let me tell you what we had, let me tell you what we blew. Well, James Madison had to finish the job. He went to all 4 of those countries. Not only did we get our guys back, because in the War of 1812 they started doing it again, they paid us for our trouble. To the point is, this is what the Pope of his day said about America. Pope Pius VII. And by the way, if I was named Pope and there were 6 other Piuses, I'd probably pick a new name. Is there another name? Not another Pius. The American commander, with a small force and in a short space of time, has done more for the cause of Christianity than the most powerful nations of Christendom have done for ages. So is this Brian Kilmeade, the Fox guy, singing Red, White, and Blue, making stories up to inspire patriotism in America? Or am I just highlighting something that we forgot about, that we didn't give enough attention to? Part of it is Jefferson. His resume is so great, from the Louisiana Purchase, first Secretary of State, founding University of Virginia, 3rd President of the United States, first Vice President of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence. When you have a resume like that, it's easy to bury something that, not many people knew how great it was what they did and what a problem would be. We would have no problem with this area of the world until 1980s, until Reagan had to bomb it again. And of course we have the problem now, which again, we're willing to take on straight on, and they underestimated us and our willingness to go for total victory. And we have a president now that's doing just that. You probably don't know Stephen Decatur. There's a Decatur house. He was supposed to be president. Handsome guy, fearless guy. He would do hand-to-hand combat, lead men into battle. He almost sounds like a mythological individual, but gets in a duel like people of that day would do constantly, even the smartest people, and he would die. One of his statements I just wanted to share with you. He stands up in one of his final toasts, says this: "Our country, in her intercourse with foreign nations, may she always be in the right, but our country right or wrong." And I think we got to keep that in mind, because when we're not in the right, we only do it because we think we're doing the right thing, and if it doesn't turn out right, it's not because we haven't researched it. And guess what? We're the type of country that would correct it. So Thomas Jefferson, the Tripoli Pirates, comes out. And I had no idea we'd be in the midst of a problem with Libya and Tripoli and Benghazi again, but it's resonating, because the guys that lost their lives when a ship blew up, when they tried a secret mission, they were buried in Libya, and their graves were defiled. There was a mission to go get the bodies out of there as late as 5 years ago. But now they seem to be somewhat secured again. The country is the Wild West. So what do we learn? Don't stop early, go for complete victory. Madison had to finish up what Jefferson did. What else was great about those days? They let the military do their job because communication was so slow. Hey guys, I'm sending you out there with guns and ships. Come back when you win. Now we're watching at CENTCOM in Tampa in real time actions and judging it in a very civil way. We're asking people to go to battle, a barbaric form of fighting, and do it in a way that almost puts their lives in jeopardy. And I don't think those rules of engagement are right. I'd like to think the world is at a place we wouldn't have to act the way we do to defend ourselves, our lives, our liberty, our country, and our allies. But it hasn't changed. We can pretend it is, but the men and women who fight know it hasn't changed. So I want to do whatever I can to make sure that they do what they do in order to be successful. That means we'll put the people in the field to come up with the plans. Not necessarily the generals in Washington, but the lieutenants and the colonels sometimes, and the majors and the captains. And I think this president gets that. That's one thing that stands out for this president. He knows what he's good at and what he's not. He doesn't mind. telling Marco Rubio, go handle Cuba. I don't really know what the problem is. You know? Hey, at CENTCOM, run the war, but I got to see some dividends. I gave you Afghanistan for a year and a half. I don't like the way it's going. Now I want new people in charge. He runs it like a CEO. And that's why I think if men and women sadly lose their lives or their limbs, I just think they did it in a way that battle's dangerous, not in a way that we're trying to be too antiseptic with it. So to put out those 2 books and get the type of response I got was flattering and overwhelming. And the one other thing that I thought that I did not have to be urged to do was my next project, which was Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans. I wanted to go in order. I wanted to do something that had impact that doesn't get enough attention. So I thought the War of 1812 was perfect. George Bush was able to tour me through the White House. And again, I don't know how I got as lucky as I did. I think he's an unbelievable person who's going to be looked at as a much better president than anyone realizes. I think his book was written as decision points for a reason. During his time, whoever was president was going to have some of the toughest decisions of generations. And he said, I got the best people. I did the best I could. These are the decisions I made. And I don't think I would have changed any, so let's make them together. If you go to his library, you touch, you see the situations, you see the facts, you make the decisions with him. So, and he's a humble guy with great humility, and that's where the rubber hits the road. When President Trump insults President Bush, I have no patience for it, because I just think he's a great guy. And I think he did a really good job. And again, he had to rotate people out to get it right. So he brings me through the bowling alley, and he shows me the archway in the White House that still exists when the British burned the White House to the ground. And he says, I like to think that it's left up there for all presidents so they know how fragile democracy is and how close we came to total annihilation. How many people remember discussing the War of 1812 in social studies or history? We had like a day. Oh, it was a draw. A lot of people thought it was an unnecessary war. Read about it, study it. Not only was it necessary, there's a reason why we haven't been invaded since. We tried it with the wrong generals. When this backwoods guy from the Carolinas named Andrew Jackson put his hand up and said, I got a 1,200-man militia, I wanted to pay the British back. They've had this coming to them 29 years after the Revolution. They said, okay, Mr. Jackson, go back to being a lawyer and a judge and an attorney general and a congressman and a senator. I know about your circumstances and how your brothers were killed and your mom died during the war and your dad died before he was born, but you're just a little wild. We have our experienced generals. We had the wrong generals. All we had was a lack of success. And so divided were we. There was a Hartford Convention where the northern states said to send messages to Britain, if you don't invade, we're probably not going to fight. They got together. They were going to James Madison to say, basically, we're going to secede. For those of you who think the world is coming apart because President Obama was president for 8 years or President Trump has been president for 2, understand where we're from, what we got through, and how we succeeded. We got through it in miraculous ways, because we were supposed to go through these tough times to become a better nation, and there's a reason why we survived, because I don't believe this planet looks the same without us, and personally, we have done more to affect positively to more people throughout generations of time than any country in the history of man. But things looked dire for a while. So they always told me, you don't have to fight that war in New Orleans. The Treaty of Ghent was signed, but it was a great win. Well, when I went to Kuwait, I was put in with the 3rd Infantry, 2nd Division, and the 1st Division. They call themselves the Cotton Ballers. So I said, why? Is that the Battle of New Orleans? Oh, yeah. And they tell the story, and I did this foolish thing of saying, yeah, that's the battle we didn't have to fight. And these guys let me have it. Oh, really? Didn't have to fight? Do you know the circumstances? So that left a seed in my mind before I was even thinking about writing a history book. So I was with the guys that were with the guys that won the war, that won the battle, that sent the message that we would take on the finest infantry in the world, the group, the nucleus of which just defeated Napoleon, and we beat him in 45 minutes. Now, how did that happen? Before I go through it piece by piece and say, well, honey, I don't need this book anymore, we can hand it off. I thought, because that's the book you have, I thought that I'd take a look and we look at this piece together. This aired on Fox and Friends, hasn't been seen since. So here is with the paperback. With the paperback, I put in perspectives of what other presidents thought of this president, because Andrew Jackson became so controversial because Donald Trump happened to win the presidency and had so many similarities to Jackson. Next thing you know, I'm debating Donald Trump and Andrew Jackson as president, and I was just talking about a 41-year-old suffering from dysentery that was a self-taught military leader that became the most famous man in America and eventually the president. So I said, in this one, I'm going to tell you what Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, what Harry Truman and Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan thought of Jackson. So before you take him off the 20 or a statue down in New Orleans, I wanted to tell you, 14 presidents visited the Hermitage, not because they were lost, because they studied him. And 5 said he was the finest president we ever had, and they were Democrats and Republicans. All right? So if we're going to have an arrogant generation that's going to reevaluate Andrew Jackson because he wasn't perfect and no one said he was, I think you should put it in perspective. So with that, here's the piece that aired on Fox and Friends, Andrew Jackson, The Miracle of New Orleans, starring me. 29 years after defeating the British and winning our independence, America was on the brink of annihilation in the War of 1812. The British were terrorizing the East Coast, had burned Washington, D.C. to the ground. They were heading down south to finish us off. Perilous times.
Here at the Hermitage, Major General Andrew Jackson was seething. He had offered his services and his militia to go into battle to fight the British in the War of 1812, but never got the return call. And his country was losing this war badly. Would he get the call? Yes. Would he offer revenge on the British? Absolutely. America needed a leader. They looked to Jackson.
Jackson enters the war, and things turn. A series of small victories all led to the final clash in New Orleans.
The historic French Quarter, Charters in St. Louis. Why would I bring you to this intersection? Because it was right here in this building, 200 plus years ago, where Andrew Jackson met with his generals, and they sketched out a battle plan to take on the British. Was nothing short of brilliant and yielded unparalleled success.
The plan: build a wall, dig a canal, fill it with water, and wait for the British to charge. The British walked right into the trap and were defeated January 8th, 1815, in under 45 minutes.
If you lost New Orleans, and if the British controlled the great city, you lose the entire Mississippi River, and you lose all of our western frontier that we acquired through the purchase, so we wouldn't have been able to do westward expansion.
The War of 1812 allowed Jackson to earn a new title, War Hero, catapulting him to the presidency for 2 terms. The boy, orphaned by 13, ended up as one of the most powerful men in American history, but he was also one of the most controversial.
Nobody doubts that Andrew Jackson was an impactful president, but now his legacy is being re-examined today. Why? Because of the people that lived in quarters like that. Those are slave quarters. And at one point, Jackson had over 100 slaves working the Hermitage property. And he had many famous battles with American Indians, as well as playing a role in the Indian Removal Act. With all those things aside, it hasn't stopped 14 presidents, some of the best we've ever had, from coming to this place to find out what made Andrew Jackson, Andrew Jackson.
Lincoln saw how Jackson kept our country together after South Carolina tried to secede during his administration. Teddy Roosevelt wrote a book on Jackson and studied his leadership principles. In Harry Truman, Andrew Jackson had perhaps his greatest admirer.
Harry Truman, for example, kept a figurine on his desk of Jackson.
That's correct, and actually came here to measure Jackson's clothes so that the statues he commissioned for Kansas City and Independence were proportioned to Jackson.
And then Ronald Reagan came here to wait a second, to salute the founder of the Democratic Party. Yup, Ronald Reagan came here to speak.
Spoke very vehemently about Jackson and the ideals of Jackson that needed to be brought back into the country in the 1980s.
And when Donald Trump came here, he was the 3rd president to lay a wreath down on Jackson's tomb.
Andrew Jackson was a military hero and genius, and a beloved president.
Andrew Jackson. The Battle of New Orleans made him famous. The way he led made him iconic. The way he lived made him infamous. And most agree for America, indispensable. So there you go. Andrew Jackson, The Miracle of New Orleans. A couple of things that stood out. If you ask Jackson what was key to his victory, he would say the Ursuline nuns. So when he gets into town, the story of the Ursuline nuns, they came in 1734. They were commissioned to get this, empower women in this region, in this new world, America. They wanted to show women how to be leaders and how to take charge and how to survive in the outback. And they sent a convent. They formed a convent. They sent a mission, and the Ursuline nuns took root. But as the French and Spanish and later the Americans through the Louisiana Purchase, they became controlled to the best they can under the auspices of America. And Thomas Jefferson visited and said, hi, hi ladies, just want you to know, as long as America's America, you could stay. And he said, great. And they heard how the British were terrorizing the Atlantic seaboard. They worried, because the British were going to invade. This is the finest fighting force. America was getting pummeled in this war. Would they be safe? Well, when Jackson gets to town, he's got to win over the townsmen, many of which were just control of Spain, Cajuns. They were from the islands. They didn't even know he was going to have loyal Americans there, because the purchase was just done a few years ago, 7 years prior. So we went to visit the nuns, and the nuns said, we love being Americans. Would you preserve us if you win? He said, yes. He goes, great. Then I'm going to pray for your victory. And we're going to take the second half of the convent, and we're going to make it a hospital. So Jackson said, with that, how can I lose? He truly believed that. If you don't believe it, 25 years later, when it was time to commemorate the winning of the war, Jackson, who was not doing well at that time, he had to go visit one place. He didn't go to the battlefield. He visited the convent to thank them, and they recorded that. And every January 8th since 1815, they come out of that convent and they ring bells in salute of Andrew Jackson and the miraculous victory that took place. Now, maybe I should put it in perspective. Jackson didn't say, I'm going to build a wall and fill it up with water. The British had the land in the exact wrong place. These pirates, who were essentially mobsters, wanted to side with us. They like the Americans. We attract the mobsters. And they was able to say, hey, listen, if you can get them somehow to land in this area where there's high grass and high weeds, this is the perfect place, because that means they got to go through you to get to New Orleans. And the British do. They disembark with their bright red coats, expecting to march right to New Orleans and actually spend Christmas on Bourbon Street. It was party town even then. So as they land, they can't get their boats close. They got to row their way in. Guess what we have? Flatboats with cannons. So as they land, expecting to waltz into New Orleans and put up with militia who tend to run instead of fight, they don't know they got to deal with Jackson. Out come the flatboats, and as soon as they land, half of them, they start getting bombed. Cannonball after cannonball. And then night falls, and Jackson makes a statement. Our enemy is on our coast and threatens invasion, but is equally true with Union energy and approval from heavens, we will beat them at every point. By the eternal, they should not sleep on our soil. The British are below, we fight them tonight. And they go in with hatchets and axes. And I read Captain Gleig, who became an esteemed officer at the time, was fighting his way up the ranks on the British side. They said it was the most brutal fighting he was ever a part of. Can you imagine the courage it takes to go into the teeth of an infantry with nothing but an axe, a gun that was useless because you couldn't see in front of you? And they were chopping them up, and then Jackson pulled them out and said, message sent. As they were healing their wounds, they start disembarking, and then come the cannonballs again. Jackson says, wait a second. They're landing here. New Orleans is here. He calls on the town to grab shovels, and together they start redigging the Rodriguez Canal. They fill it up with water. They start making a wall. This is women, children, Cherokee Indians, Choctaw Indians, all coming together. So the British have one way to fight, it's straight ahead. And we have better shots, we have a better strategy, we've got better generals. Now, Admiral Packenham lands. General Packenham lands. He looks around. He was late because they killed Admiral Ross in the Battle of Baltimore. Ross burned Washington. We killed him in Baltimore. So they need a new commander. Packenham comes. Now, they wanted Wellington. Wellington's quote was, I don't really want to fight over there. I don't promise myself much success fighting Americans. What did he know? But he sent his guys and his brother-in-law. It's true. So Packenham leaves. He goes, what did you do? We're boxed in. So these other guys looking to prove themselves, hey, if you don't have the courage to fight, go ahead, get back on your boat, go home. Of course, he goes, I'll figure it out. So he goes to move up, goes to move forward, gets repelled. Move forward, gets repelled. Guys start dying. Our guys aren't. So he says, I have an idea. We'll go up the Mississippi, and when we go to fight on January 8th, we'll go up the Mississippi, we'll come around the berm, we'll shock them. Great idea. Except for they didn't take into account the wind and the current. The boats go in the water, they go backwards. The fighting starts, there's no one covered up the flank. And they end up getting mowed down. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. 100% accurate. We have 5,000 guys, they have 9,000. We lose 13. 13! They lose 291. We wound 1,262. We have 39 wounded, 19 missing, 484 missing, blown apart. But the best thing we do, we kill their officers. 3 generals, 7 colonels, 75 officers, dead. When they go to surrender, Jackson keeps sending this guy Lambert back. He says, send me your senior officer. Finally he says, will you tell him I am it, you killed the others? Jackson holds on to him. He wins the battle. Word gets out, the Treaty of Ghent is signed. Then word gets back to Washington that we won. We beat the finest infantry in the world in 45 minutes that defeated Napoleon. Now, if you think this is Brian Kilmeade, the Fox guy who just sings red, white, and blue, the message was sent to the world. And Jefferson said it was the most powerful message ever sent. We will not be invaded. We're not going anywhere. Get used to us. We would never be invaded again. So when Jackson was asked, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, you didn't really have to fight that. Here's what Jackson said 25 years later. If General Pakenham and his 10,000 matchless veterans could have annihilated my little army, he would have captured New Orleans, sentryed all the contiguous territory. Through a technicality, the war was over. Great Britain would have immediately abrogated the Treaty of Ghent and would have ignored Jefferson's transaction with Napoleon. Turns out they were going to what was the World Court then, trying to say Napoleon had no right to sell us the Louisiana Territory. They were going to reverse the whole thing and stop us from going past the Mississippi. If you don't think it's true, 8 years ago, Ron Drez, a decorated Marine and esteemed historian, who you'll know more about, now working with Martha McCallum on her book, 8 years ago he found paperwork showing that General Pakenham was told, if you hear any word of a ceasefire or a treaty, ignore it and stay. If you don't think the British stick around, tell that to India. Tell that to Hong Kong. They're still in the islands. They were going to stick around. They feared what we'd become. Which farewell address from Jackson, I thought was what I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to be taking questions about everything from Donald Trump on down. He says, I thank God that my life has been spent in a land of liberty, that he has given me a heart to love my country with the affection of a son to his country, and a father to his people. When he finally passes away, just shy of 80 years old, there was a statue dedicated 5 years later. And in that statue, Stephen Douglas was asked to do the dedication. And here's what he said. When Jackson died, there was a sense of completion, that the race had been finished. He felt his work is done, his mission fulfilled. And there was, for a moment, unanimous tribute. All felt there was a great man had fallen, yet there was a consolation in the consciousness that the luster of his name, the fame of his great deeds, and the result of his patriotic services would be preserved through time, a rich inheritance to the devotees of freedom. So we put him on the 20. We made a statue in Washington. We put it in front of the White House. We put a statue in New Orleans. And what are we doing now? Trying to take him off the 20. People are saying we have to have guards and security around a statue in Washington, and there's a group out there trying to take him out of New Orleans. There would be no American New Orleans without Jackson. Thankfully, people are sobering up. They're not touching the statue in New Orleans. Trump says to me, don't say it yet, but I'm not taking him off the 20. And President Obama had it off. He's just not even addressing it. So there is some pushback. And I think with the people in this room and colleges like this and universities like this that are going to push back, whatever's going on in public school, there'll be more private institutions. They're going to push people other ways because I think there's too many people who get it, that America's a wonderful place but not a perfect place. But the thing that makes what's great about us is we're trying to be perfect. How great is that? We're trying to be perfect in our house. We're trying to be better parents. We're trying to be better coaches. We're trying to be better teachers. We're trying to be better anchors. We're trying to be better grocery store workers or insurance agents. We're always trying to get better. We don't want success for us. We want the opportunity to achieve it. We want to pursue happiness. We don't want it guaranteed. Just roll out the ball and let us play. That's all we ask for. So by telling these stories and bringing it forward, I think we can reattach to our roots to find out how we got here and why should we have pride. We should have pride to be here. Whether you're a first generation or you came over in the Mayflower, this is part of your legacy. Embrace it. Warts and all. We never said the people on statues are perfect, but man, they were significant. We don't have to judge them, we could study them. And that's what I'm trying to relay here. I'm not the smartest guy, but I just relish in the opportunity to spread the word that goes on. And my next project is Sam Houston, Avenging the Alamo. I did not realize how much the Texas story is an American story. And I can't get enough of it. And I'm boring my family to tears by telling them stuff. It's the first project that I had that I really knew nothing about. I always had a foundation and I didn't. So it took an extra almost a year to study it, and I've been through it, and it's going to be combined with a TV special on top of it, San Jacinto, Goliad, and you know the Alamo. What it meant in 1 year and what happened, it goes back to our country should not look like it is. We should not have the success we had unless someone above was pulling for us, because the world's a better place because we're here. So I do think we're the beacon of hope to the world, and people are looking up to us, whether you have a president saying, come over here, or we're saying America first. America first doesn't mean America alone. America first means we got to be the type of country that people want to come to and look up to. And if we just open up our borders and spend through our social programs, it's not okay to have a big heart and not have a good head. We have to do it the right way. We have no country to look up to and no country for people to aspire to. So that's my opinion. I'm not speaking for anyone but me. On a side note, before I open it up to the floor, Fox Nation launched last week, and I spent the last year, some people say, Brian, I don't see you. Sometimes you miss from the show. Most of the time, was doing these shoots to get it ready. They're 45-minute documentaries, most of mine. It's What Made America Great. And I went to the Alamo, went to Monticello, went to the Hermitage, went to Mount Rushmore, visited Fort Jefferson. I revisited the Burr-Hamilton feud, went to all the places. And I just bring you, I have 10, 5 are up, the other 5 will be coming up. And I think you'll see a lot what I'm talking about in front of you. And I think it'll get you excited again. With every story, I have an angle of something you don't know, I think. So I'm not just saying, look at this great library. I'm giving you something you probably don't know. I hope you guys like it. We're going to do a lot of stuff. Look at the parks. Ryan Zinke brought me under the Lincoln Memorial. Ryan Zinke brought me behind Mount Rushmore to the secret tunnel. It was supposed to be the Hall of Records. He allowed me to sit on Washington's head and look down at Jefferson and Lincoln's nose. And you get that angle. It's just tremendous. So I think everyone in this room gets it. I think that's why this university is growing. You got a great message in a great town, in a wonderful city. Well, like most wonderful cities, you got too much traffic. That's why I was 20 minutes late. So that's my formal presentation, but I'd like to open it up for questions. You cannot convince me. I met about 100 people. There's not one shy person among you. And I know you have opinions, so don't be shy. And it doesn't have to be positive. If you have something negative, we could always throw you out. Got some very strong people in the back. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Brian, this is such a pleasure. I can't even begin to tell you. I was at the Hermitage in September. The tomb was vandalized in April. Very, very disturbing. I hope that you will use the influence you have to start pushing prosecutions for these people who are doing this stuff.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm on the board now of the Hermitage. In the beginning, they didn't embrace it because I guess they didn't. I'm not too sure they were too fond of Fox, but after a while, they were really fond of Fox. So now I'm on their board. That costs tens of thousands of dollars to bring in experts. I forgot what they call them, but you can't get antiquity experts to go and rehab that tomb. They have no cameras. Believe it or not, there's no cameras.
They do now.
They do now. So I don't know if they can prosecute.
Now.
Yeah, I don't know if they can prosecute, but it does look good again. Can you believe it? He was buried before the Civil War, and the first time he was defiled was 2017. We did cover that on Fox and Friends.
The other thing I wanted to just tell you, you said you're doing a book on the Alamo and General Houston. I learned on the tour at the Hermitage that Sam Houston was making visits to the Hermitage to see Andrew Jackson.
Constantly.
It's possible Texas was born at the Hermitage.
No question. And not to get too much in the weeds, but John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson had this rivalry. He believed the Louisiana Purchase, we got Texas. And John Quincy Adams said, if you give us Florida, we'll give you Texas. He says, you don't have to give up Florida. I would have taken Florida without a deal. He would have, and he did. And he gave up Texas. There was a great argument that's still out there today that if you look at the deal, we got Texas. We never should have been Mexico's. And John Quincy Adams just wanted a smooth transition to get the Spanish out of Florida. And Jackson says, I basically did that already. So that was part of it. Sam Houston fought against the Red Sticks. And a 20-something-year-old, a big guy, 6'3", fought so gallantly under Jackson. He got wounded 3 times, wounded and bleeding. They wanted to finish him off before night fell. He said, is there any, Jackson walked over to sickbay and goes, does anyone I know you guys are hurting, but can anyone fight? We're having one more surge. Houston goes, I'm fine with that. Sure enough, he leads the battle, gets shot in the thigh, gets shot in the arm. He would actually ooze the rest of his life. Those wounds would never heal. They said to him, to Sam Houston, we're not going to bother taking the bullets out of you because we don't think you're going to last the night. He lasted the night. He lasted the next night, and they said, we probably should have taken the bullets out of you. He ended up having oozing infections the rest of his life, but then he got brought to Washington. What did he see? It leveled and burned to the ground. Do you think you had to tell him again how fragile democracy is and how special America was? Never. He fought to the last day to avoid the Civil War, to the point where Lincoln was sending emissaries, because he was governor of Texas, to say, if you just stay out of it, I'll provide all the help you need and protection. But Texas voted to fight with the South, and therefore he didn't stay out of it. So I'm telling you too much, but I'm just fascinated by the relationship between the two.
I believe that the first woman president will be from the Republican Party. Do you think that there is a woman that would be in a good position for that?
Yeah, very simple. Nikki Haley. Governor, a mom, the wife of a military, wife of a husband who's in the military, already knows how to run a state, tremendous compassion in times of terror, which would happen in that Carolina church. I have never seen anyone do a better job as UN ambassador in my lifetime than her. Goes along with Donald Trump, who's unorthodox, gets it. Remember, she was with Rubio, and she didn't sacrifice anything in order to do what she did, and she was so smart. She said, I'll take this job if I could talk directly to you. So her and the president spoke constantly. Almost nothing she said the president didn't know about ahead of time, and man, brilliant. Pompeo's been brilliant too. I think he's going to run, but to answer your question, I think Nikki Haley. Also, I think, you know who's going to be a star? Liz Cheney. She's going to be speaker.
Can you tell us what you're comfortable telling about your family, like father, siblings, wife, and kids? Just know who you are.
Yeah. I got a great family. I have 3 kids. One's 22, one's 17, one is 16. And I just remember, it seems like yesterday when I was saying 12, 8, and 6. I mean, I can't believe I have a 22-year-old son who's now working with the XFL because he wants to get into the player side of football. And he doesn't want marketing or sponsorship. And I'm going, oh my goodness, you got to break into the NFL somehow. Extremely tough. Just like this, my thing, took me 12 years to be an overnight success. So he got a job with the XFL, which is going to be launching in the spring. It has a relationship with the NFL. My other daughter is going to be going to Skidmore. If early decision, is going to play soccer there in Saratoga Springs, a great independent school, and she wants to teach. And my other daughter joined a gang and doesn't live at home. No, she's 16, soccer and basketball player, and it's a fun house. I got a great wife, and it's Dawn. Sounds like I'm reaching for her name, but I know it sounded bad to hesitate on her name. But on Monday it'll be our 25th wedding anniversary, and we met in high school. And I have 2 dogs who are really big, Great Pyrenees. Yeah.
Brian, thanks for being here.
Thanks for the invite.
By the way, if you think it's snowing, you got to come back. That's not snow. Hey, I read your first 2 books, Washington and Jefferson, compelling read. It reads, it's a page turner. It's just like you're there. How do you do your research? How long does it take? And how do you have the capacity to make it feel like you're right there?
Thank you, by the way. And the one thing I did is I got a lot. I think of it as Fox gets things moving. If you notice, by the way they move through stories, they basically gut the flower. Like sometimes you look at their stories, our stories in news, be last night about 9:05, 2 shots were fired. Next thing you know, you feel like you're in the middle of a story. Fox taught me to write actively. People are in a rush. You got to move. You got to keep it going. Between sports and the Foxizing it. Keeping things moving, people don't have a lot of time, and the short attention span, which I hope exists in the next generation, and I want them to like these books. I do that. In the research, if it wasn't for the kindness of people at these libraries, I would not be nowhere. And with electronics, I couldn't do it. I go back and forth to libraries now without leaving my house. Well, going back, I'm able to pull documents in by leaving my house. So it's been unbelievable. And I go to these spots. The first thing I do is go to the spots. What Fox Nation allowed me to do is they're actually paying me to go to the spots. I was not going to do it until I went to the Alamo, and then I stayed. Ken Burns was promoting something, and I go, okay, he goes, what's your next book? I go, I don't really have an idea. I'm going to the Alamo on Friday. He goes, well, if you go to the Alamo, go to San Jacinto. I go, what? He goes, San Jacinto. So I had to call his office a month later. I go, what are you talking? What is San Jacinto? He goes, Jacinto. So I looked it up. He goes, the greatest undertold story ever. It's 18 minutes. We win this battle. So he pushed me on it. The Alamo, they hired me again. Next thing you know, I got had 4 visits to the Alamo, 2 visits to Goliad. Then I went to San Jacinto. Texas does things big. They got the biggest library. They actually have 1 elevator, right? And they have an elevator operator. I feel so bad for this woman. They get so few visitors because very few people. I'm like saying, am I your only guy today? So I walked in. They got one of these elevators where you have to close the fence, you know? So you actually watch, and I'm wondering, is this how I'm going to die? So you go up to the top, and there's people in there, and they just sit there and they go, what can we do? And I'm able to look at photos and go through things, and they say, okay, now that we have this relationship, now we can communicate. You got to show them that you're serious and you respect what they do because they want to get their story out. So they help me, and they streamline, and I go through it. I have an unbelievable editor. I have a historian that helps me out. So it's just a process. What I do is, to give you too much detail, is I do it in chunks. I don't feel like I'm writing a book. I think I'm doing a phase. My first phase is study everything possible. My next phase is to divide it up into sections. My next phase is to list the chapters. The next phase is to write summaries of the chapters. The next phase is to start blowing up the chapters one by one. And at the same time, I got this incredible editor, and she'll stop me and say, we need to meet. And I'll go meet with her, and she goes, what are you trying to say here? And I tell her, and she writes it, and she records it. She goes, now here's your chapter the way you want to say it. You have to write it the way you just told me. So that's what, when I say, he goes, you have to tell the story with your book. Don't be a writer, is basically what she says. So I don't know if I should have told you that. But that's how you do it. She goes, sit down, let's talk this through first.
Thanks again, Brian, for the book. One of my dad's favorite jokes growing up was, when was the War of 1812 fought?
Okay.
And thanks to this book, I know a little bit more.
A little bit more.
So
it ends in 1850.
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you very much. The quote that I like most from Jackson is, the Bible is the rock on which this republic rests. And I know that through all your research, I'm sure you found other nuggets of tie-ins to the Christianity and his faith. And yeah.
Well, I got something on that. So if you are Andrew Jackson and your dad dies before you're born, you're living in the backwoods without any food stamps, social programs, but of course there was Medicaid. So you're sitting there, your mom's got to go get 5 jobs, you have an older brother, another brother that's 1 year older, one that's 5 years older, and then a war breaks out when you're 14. You volunteer for that war, you get captured along with your other brother. Your brother gets hit, he gets hit in the head, he keeps a scar the rest of his life. His other brother takes a blow to the head, dies basically in prison, they get him out, but he dies at his house. So his other brother dies of heat stroke in a battle in the Revolutionary War. His mom goes to get a job. He finds out his mom's dead when a trunk of clothes shows up on his doorstep. She died of some disease, helping out a cousin, trying to earn some extra money as a domestic worker. He's all alone at 14. If anyone should not like God, it's 15-year-old orphan boy Andrew Jackson in the middle of a town without any relatives or friends. But it turns out that town rallied him. His town raised him. His country raised him. His county raised him. He was determined to matter. Instead of being a vagrant or a criminal, he wanted to make his name known. He became a lawyer, a judge, a congressman, a senator, attorney general, a militia general, a regular general, and a 2-term president. He believes that people, instead of saying my life is cursed, he believes he was blessed. So that is the American success story. I thought I was writing about a great president. That's the American dream when it was just a thought and a hope. He made it happen.
I'm going to ask a question, and then we'll wrap up here in just a second. Recently, some guys followed you around.
Yeah.
With video cameras. They've gone after Tucker Carlson in his house. Can you share a little bit about what happened on the video camera issue when they chased you around a little bit?
Yeah, this is a story. Every day I take, for 20 years, I take the subway, I walk to the subway, and I take the train. I was going a little bit different of a way down 7th Avenue in New York City, and there's people who lived who hate Fox and Trump like I've never seen before. But I physically never feel threatened, but I'm very cognizant of not giving anybody anything on camera that's going to live forever. So this Israeli couple comes up to me in the street and says, "We watch you every day in Israel." So I take the picture with them, and I walk a few steps over, and these other guys come up to me, and they're kind of young, like 30-ish, and they go, "Oh, you Brian Kilmeade, can we take a picture?" So he goes to do a selfie. I go, "Yeah, how can I turn them down? Plus, I don't turn people down. I'm going to sign all your books. I like people. I think it's a privilege to have this job." And people don't have to agree with me, but I could talk to them about it. So he takes a picture, and he's rolling video. And I go, "Hey, just put it on a picture." We take the picture. He goes, "Yeah, can I interview you?" I go, "No, not going to do an interview." He goes, "Yeah, what is it like to be Donald Trump's best friend, his key policy advisor?" So I go, "Here we go." So a guy standing like here, and all of a sudden another guy pops up like that. So they start saying things, looking up all like horrible, trying to incite like a riot. Fox likes white people only, this guy's a racist, Donald Trump's a racist, Brian Kilmeade's a racist, everyone take a look. So I'm saying to myself, how do you handle this? I'm still not sure I handled it right. But I just decided I got to get home. My daughter's got a game at 4:15. If I miss the 3 o'clock train, I got to wait to 3:45. I'm going to miss her game for these clowns? No. So I go down the subway. They keep going. They go in the subway. They keep going. Now, if I grab you, he rolls on it. The Fox guy loses his temper. If I get in a debate, I give him an interview he doesn't deserve. Post it forever. So he's screaming, trying to incite some crazy stuff in a New York subway, which happens anyway. So I walk out, then you walk up to Penn Station, and I got to wait for my train in 10 minutes. And I realized I wanted a smoothie, so I got a smoothie. They didn't stop. And I could have went into the police station, it was right on the corner, but I'm like, do I want to look like I need law enforcement? Does that make me look weak? So I just kept going. They didn't stop for 45 minutes. But here's the good news. So I went to the game, and I go, around 6 o'clock, I called Fox, and I go, this is going to get posted. I got to give them a heads up, but I'm pretty sure I didn't give them anything. So I told them. They get scrambled because we have the best security in the world. They feel terrible this happened. And around the next day, around 10 o'clock, it goes up. Well, they got such backlash. By the next day, they pulled it down, and their Twitter accounts went private. I never said a word, but they look, I believe, like such morons, idiots, aggressors, and petty that it kind of worked to get it pulled down as opposed to engaging and saying, what's your problem? I don't advise Donald Trump. There's nobody at Fox that's a racist. He's not a racist. Do I really want to get in a debate with two strangers and give them an interview they don't deserve? But that's what you have to deal with now when you go out. If I'm with my family and they did something like they did to the Homeland Security Secretary, like they did to Ted Cruz, like they do to Stephen Miller, throwing out Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I don't know how I would have handled that because that's clearly an aggressive move and they were in your face. But it really alarmed a lot of people at Fox, and they said, "You want security?" I go, "No, I do the same thing every day, and I've done everything since. I hop on a subway to a train. Do you think your traffic's bad? That's nothing compared to New York City. You can't get home to my house after 2 o'clock if you're in a car." And Fox goes, "We'll give you a car every day." I go, "I don't want one. I get a car on the way in. They're great to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. But on the way back, they said, you can have a car anytime you want." I go, "I want to be in the subway, and I want to be on a train because I know when I'm getting home." So that's the story, but it's a crazy time. But hopefully things are going to get better. I wouldn't mind a few compromises at the top. I think it'll ripple down to the bottom until any party gets 60 votes and the majority in the House. You're going to have to compromise. I'm tired of not getting anything done. I think at one point we got to start compromising. It's going to tick off big conservatives and staunch liberals, but who cares? We'll start getting things done, and the electorate will respond and decide who's got the better ideas. That's what I hope.
Great.
Okay.
Can we give Brian another round of applause here?
Thank you.
All right. So at the Centennial Institute, we are famous for our ties. Ben Carson has worn these during the Republican primary debate. Ken Buck wears them from the floor. Number of members of Congress have these. These are 1776 ties.
Wow.
Right there. And we included a scarf, a 1776 scarf for your wife.
Wow, thank
so
you.
You've got
I
a
will
red
definitely wear
and
that.
you have a blue one. Let us know when you're on Fox and Friends with that. We'd
Okay,
love to see it.
I'm calling you all at 2:30 in the morning to tell you my tie selection.
Let's give Brian another round of applause.
Thank you very much.
We can meet him right out there. Thank you so much, my
Appreciate
friend.
it. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.